Becky?
This question comes from Davis Hance in Houston, Texas. He writes, what do you think about the business models of the big banks as compared to the regional banks in the wake of the events at Silicon Valley Bank? And how does the perceived implicit guarantee of all deposits at all banks affect big banks and those regional banks?
Yeah, well, I can say this. If you follow sound banking methods, which means not doing some things that other people do, a bank could be a perfectly decent investment. In fact, Charlie and I, well, me originally in 1969, we bought a bank at Berkshire, and we had $19 million invested in that bank, and we had $17 million, I think, invested in our insurance companies. And if the Banking Holding Company Act of 1970 hadn't been passed, we might have ended up owning a lot of banks instead of a lot of insurance companies. We were looking at more banks, and Harry Keefe was taking us around Chicago, and there were other things we could do. And then, bingo, they passed the 1970 Bank Holding Company Act, and we had to divest ourselves of that bank in 10 years. Which,
by the way, it never had a bad debt.
Oh,
it never had an unnecessary cost. It made nothing but money with no risk. It never presented any deposit insurance risk to the government.
Zero.
It was a lovely, sound, constructive institution in this community, and any person who really deserved credit could get credit.
And we were going to buy more banks.
We were forced out of it.
And we were going to buy more banks. And if we bought more banks, we probably wouldn't have expanded the insurance business. But the law changed, and so we divested, and we've done okay in insurance. But banking was more attractive to us. It was bigger, and there were more targets to buy. And you could run a perfectly sound bank then, and no negotiable certificates of deposit, all these things, all the inventions that came later, and you could still run it today, and you could earn a lot. You could earn good money, very good money, and we would have found more banks, but we're precluded from doing that. And we sold bank stocks in the last, well, we sold them first when the pandemic broke out, and then we sold some more in the last 6 months. And we don't know where the shareholders of the big banks necessarily, or the regional banks or any are heading. I've got my bank, I've got my own personal money, and I'm probably above the FDIC limit, and I've got it with a local bank, and I think I don't worry about it in the least. But in terms of owning banks, events will determine their future. And you've got politicians involved. You've got a whole lot of people who don't really understand how the system works. And I would say that you've had something less than a perfect communication between various people and the American public. So the American public is probably as confused about banking as ever, and that has consequences. And nobody knows what the consequences are, because every event starts recreating a different dynamic. I mean, in physics, you know that pi is going to be 3.14, infinite number of numbers after that. But no matter what happens, but you don't know what has happened to the stickiness of deposits at all. It got changed by 2008. It's gotten changed by this. I mean, and that changes everything. And so we're very cautious in a situation like that about ownership of banks, and we do remain with one bank holding a deal, but we originated that deal, and with the Bank of America. And I like Bank of America. I like the management, and I proposed the deal to them, so I stick with it. But do I know how to project out what's going to happen from here? The answer is I don't, because I've seen so many things in the last few months which really weren't that unexpected to me to see, but which reconfirmed my belief that the American public doesn't understand our banking system, and some people in Congress perhaps don't understand it any more than I understand. I don't understand why the spaceships go up. I mean, there's all kinds of things I don't know about. But if you're in Congress, you take a position on everything, and sometimes it's to your advantage, if you really understand it, not to say exactly what you feel. And here we are. Charlie, yeah.
Well, a lot has happened in banking in my lifetime. I welcomed all that early banking of the deserving immigrants by the early Bank of America. And I think all the credit cards, when they came in as original bank cards, were a great contribution to civilization. But the gamier it gets and the more it looks like investment banking, the less I like it as a citizen. I am deeply distrustful of situations in which everybody wants to get rich and envies everybody else. I regard that atmosphere as utterly toxic.
And to people who like one story, which is, again, a true story, and I'm not naming the name, and it wasn't Pete Jeffries because he might fit this name, but it wasn't Pete. But our hero, Gene Abegg, was going to have to retire at some point. And so we hired a future replacement. It's kind of a little problem I talked before about having the perfect business, and now we're going to bring in somebody. We actually bring in somebody that went to Central High with Charlie. Although
My class.
Yeah, and Charlie didn't know I was picking out this guy, and he wasn't.
If you'd asked me, we wouldn't have hired him.
Well, if I asked you, I probably wouldn't hire anybody, but that's another question. But this guy comes over, a perfectly decent guy, but presentable, looks like a banker and everything. And of course, the first thing he wants to do, we've got this wonderful bank, but we got the crummiest looking building in Rockford. And we don't need a great building, we just need a great banker. And naturally, this guy wants to build a new building. And because we were the most profitable bank, but we didn't look like we were the most profitable bank. So I told him he could have any building he wanted as long as it was not higher than, it had to be shorter than our nearest competitor. And he lost interest totally. He wanted to be on the top floor of the biggest building in town. And I told him he could horizontally do anything he wanted, but he couldn't do it vertically. And it taught me a lot about the guy's motivations in life, and he didn't end up running the bank anyway. Anyway, that's all I know about banking, probably more.